Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Friedman, and I'm the Director of Research at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. This is the second event of our third annual China and the Mid-Med Conference and Workshop, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my partners in this venture, Professor Sela of the Department of East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University, and Professors Enrico Fardella of Peking University, Andrea Ghiselli of Fudan University, who established the ChinaMed Research Consortium and Network. I'm delighted today to be able to introduce our speaker, Dr. LIORA HENDELMAN-BAAVUR, who is the director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies, the leading academic research center in Israel for the study of Iran. Dr. HENDELMAN-BAAVUR is a senior faculty member at Tel Aviv University, and her research interests include the history of Iranian journalism, gender studies, Iranian popular culture, and Iranian civil society and the new media in the Islamic Republic of Iran. She's the author of Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, Popular Culture Between Two Revolutions, published by Cambridge University Press. Dr. HENDELMAN-BAAVUR, thank you for being with us today. The theme of this year's conference and workshop is technology, governance, and security. But what we wanted to discuss with you today is how the Islamic Republic sees China and how that narrative fits things that we hear in the Western and international media about Iran's desire and East. So maybe we could start today's discussion. The previous 2 months have been a period of big change in Iran. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about Iran's new president, Ibrahim Raisi, and how Raisi is likely, his new presidency is likely to influence the direction of Iran's relationship with China, if at all.
Okay, so from the outset, it is important to note that Iran has enjoyed growing trade with China since the early 1990s. When Beijing launched the BRI in 2013, it was warmly welcomed by Tehran. Further along, and partly as a result of the international sanctions led by the US over the past decade, China has become Iran's most important commercial partner. And this, in a way, helped put an end to 30 years of Germany's leading role. One of the major highlights of the relations between Iran and China was undoubtedly the historic visit of Xi Jinping in Iran in 2016. And at the time, Hassan Rouhani and Xi oversaw the signing of, if I remember correctly, about 15 agreements or more for cooperation in different fields, including security and cooperation on peaceful nuclear energy. So the 25-year strategic cooperation agreement that was signed in March 2021 did not come out of the blue, and it can be seen as a major milestone along a road these countries have embarked on a while back. And in this respect, specifically to your question as to the new president, Raisi, it seems that his entry to the presidential office is unlikely to change much the course of the relationship between the two countries, but it can either accelerate them or perhaps slow them down a bit, and I will relate to it further along in some of the comments I would like to raise. I will say that Iran's spiritual leader, Ali Khamenei, stated during the 2016 visit of Chinese president to Tehran that the Islamic Republic will never forget China's cooperation during the sanction era. And this line of gratitude became even more rampant in Iranian official discourse following Washington withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018. And from Tehran's point of view, joining China's BRI caravan provides considerable economic opportunities. It also fractures its international isolation, and it stands to balance China's ties with rival neighbors, Saudi Arabia, for instance. Now, having said all this, with respect to specifically to the discourse in Iran, we can say that the agreement vented old concerns and gave rise to new fears, thus bringing into the surface an intensified debate inside Iran. I would also say that the new Iranian president that will enter office next month, that is early in August, and it is still too early to tell what his policy will be. He did mention in the first press conference that he held soon after he was elected that his intention to pursue the relations with China and even develop them further. He also indicated that he has no intention to visit the US or to meet with US President Joe Biden. And Raisi is considered to be a hardliner in terms of Iranian politics, and accordingly, some Western analysts hold the general assumption that Iran's ties with China, and for that matter with Russia as well, will enjoy further development. But regardless of being a hardliner, Raisi's top priority is to address domestic problems of livelihood of Iranian citizens and to achieve the lifting, or at least partial lifting, of US sanctions. And therefore, there are those who predict that his government will not pursue a radical confrontational policy against the US.
Thank you, LIORA. That was a great introduction, and it really set the stage quite well for a deeper discussion of these issues. In terms of Iran facing some challenges at home, and that being Raisi's first priority or mandate as the new president, some have tried to make a connection between Iran's ability to improve its situation at home, particularly with respect to some of the economic challenges it's facing, and a growing relationship with China. Meaning there are those who talk about China as being a potential solution to some of Iran's domestic economic challenges. And I wanted to just get your sense of how that's viewed in Iran, meaning analysts and scholars from the outside often make much of this potential relationship as being a panacea for Iran's problems, meaning China. But I'd like to know a little bit more about how Iranians see it, both in terms of the Iranian official discourse and maybe if there's a difference between the popular discourse.
Okay, so I will start by saying that, because I did it myself, if you Google the 25-year agreement in Persian, one of the recurring feature in the headlines of many results is the question, we know about it. What do we know about this agreement? And this seemingly very simple question is the most crucial aspect at the moment in relation to the latest Sino-Iranian agreement. And we are talking for the past 3 or 4 months. What has caught the attention, especially of online activists, and also raised concerns in the public debate in social media, is concerns the mysterious nature of this agreement, and also the very contradicted way in which government officials, Iranian government officials, talk about the agreement or about the content of this strategic document with China. And I'll give an example. In Asia, for instance, Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iranian foreign minister, while answering questions of the audience in an online room of Clubhouse, which is the current very popular social media outlet in Iran, was quoted saying, in order to have a good relationship with China, Iran has to have a good relationship with Europe. And if Iran wants to have a good relationship with Europe, it has to have a good relationship with China. So this is one point of relating to this agreement, which is not clearly addressing the content of the agreement. More or less at the same time, an Iranian newspaper published an article by a former Iranian ambassador to Malaysia, warning the foreign and intelligence ministries in Iran to be very cautious about Chinese presence in Iran. He said all sorts of things, among them that the Chinese government is trying to send agents into other countries under guise of workers and experts and business persons, and perhaps their increased presence in Iran is not at one with Iranian national interests. Later, he also mentioned all sorts of rumors that had spread since the previous year, according to which China had been given control over port facilities and other strategic assets like the island of Kashmir Kish in the Persian Gulf in exchange for diplomatic and financial support from Beijing. Now, these rumors evoke firm responses against the policy of franchising through which the Islamic Republic is trying to wrest itself from the economic decline or the deterioration of the economy, which only intensified following the outbreak of COVID-19. So there is a lack of transparency when it comes to the details of this agreement, and the non-disclosure aspects of the agreement raise doubts, and doubts are safe harbor for rumors, and these are flying all over and around, both in the political discourse and outside of it among the people of Iran and among activists operating outside of Iran. And there is a growing criticism that joins other aspects of critical engagement with China regarding the influx of thousands of foreign construction and infrastructure laborers employed by Chinese companies into Iran. And I would say that the discourse in Iran also draws on the international discourse and the national debates in other countries. Iranians are not blind to China's involvement in Africa and Eastern Europe, in the Pacific, in addition to its involvement in the Persian Gulf and the greater Middle East. So they are very much aware, and it highlights their national interest, let's say campus, that China is actually employing in Iran a sort of a new colonialism or economic imperialism, and they are truly afraid, and they give voice to their fears regarding the national interest of Iran. They feel that Iran is being sold to China in a very cheap price, and they are trying to stop it. They even issued a petition online. I checked it 2 days ago. There are more than 100,000 signatures at this petition calling China get out of Iran. There is also a letter that it is said to be sent to the Chinese president, not to believe what he reads in Iranian media, because the true nature of what the Iranian people really wants is to be found in social media and not in the conventional media or state-sponsored press in Iran.
Thank you, LIORA. I think that doubts are a safe harbor for rumors is quite a statement and a good way to think about often how the discourse about China and Iran or elsewhere can take on different characters. So I think that was a particularly colorful way to characterize some of the popular discourse in Iran. I have some additional questions, but I know some of my colleagues do as well. So I'm going to give Professor Ghiselli an opportunity to ask you a question of his own, and then maybe I'll continue from there. Professor Ghiselli, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks, LIORA, for the great introduction, and this is super interesting topic. So I actually have a couple of questions, but I will just ask one for the moment on the specific agreement signed between China and Iran. It seems to me there is general consensus that this agreement is good for at least some in Iran. This is my impression, what comes out looking at both Iranian media, but also is what more or less is circulating in English language media. On the contrary, I would say there's much more doubt about what good for, what China can benefit out of this. With even, I would say, a prominent Chinese scholars talking with a Deutsche Welle, German media, a few months ago, I believe, in which journalists asked him, why did China decide to sign this agreement? And he said pretty much that I can only believe that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, did its math, and that there is definitely something that China will benefit from. But it's difficult at the moment to think about, something concretely good for China. Especially, we already have strong ties, strong economic ties with the country. We don't want an alliance with them. So what do you think is, why do you think China decided to sign this agreement in this moment? Is it only just to, annoy the Americans, or do you think there is something else?
Okay, so I'm not a China policy expert, so I can only suggest or rather assume that it was maybe an opportunity for China to slam the US and its policies in the region. And we can also see perhaps a similar line with China's reaction to the signing of the Abraham Accords. It happened during the Trump administration, under which the relations of Washington and Beijing reached an unprecedented tension between these two powers. And it is widely believed that China also aspires to fulfill a more active and central role in the Middle East, some will say on the expense of the US. So more than the relations with Iran, China also has vested interests in other countries, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Egypt, etc. In one article, not in Chinese newspapers, but in Iranian newspapers, there were experts in Iran saying that if you compare the Chinese investments in other countries, then Iran is lag behind to other countries in the region, which has a much bigger trade rate with China. So they were trying to ease the public opinion against further development of trade ties of Iran with China. But having said that, it also seems that while China is trying to balance between its economic interest and its geopolitical considerations. And in that respect, Iran is a geostrategic bridge due to its location. It is also a source of cheap energy for China and for Chinese investment. And again, it doesn't only tell us about the relations between China and Iran, but also of the relations between China and the region and China with other superpowers, whether it's in the US or with Russia that we didn't even mention so far. So I believe that there is more to this policy than just China's ties with Iran, but a bigger picture.
Thanks, LIORA. I think that was a really good answer in the sense that sometimes the concrete returns on political maneuvers is not always tangible or even easily visible. So thank you. Professor Fardella, you had a question you wanted to raise, please.
Thank you, Brandon, for Professor. I thank you, Yora, for sharing like so many insights. I'm not an Iran expert, so I'm looking at the region from a Chinese perspective, but this is the reason why I would like to ask you something, I mean, within this category of China as a sort of like economic provider, a sort of economic alternative, vis-a-vis, this closure and the sanction imposed by the US, and which is, according to your knowledge of in the internal discourse in Iran, is there something specific, like the Iranian people, the Iranian observer, how they are framing this necessity of Chinese investment? Is there something, I don't know, is more, for example, connected to the modernization of the energy sector in Iran, or maybe a specific infrastructure development, or some discussion about ports? So how this, economic support or investment coming from China are being perceived, and which kind of need you see is emerging from the Iranian perspective? So how this money, how the Iranian would like to use this economic, support coming from China? And this is the first question. The second question, then I would like to ask you the political profile of China. You already mentioned something before. So how the Iranian, China as a member of the Security Council, and of course then Russia, this is also quite interesting. We are talking about China, but how the Iranian public opinion is framing how China politically can be useful to Iran, and if there is a difference with Russia, for example, in this respect. Not because, if we just look at China per se, maybe we might, lose a little bit, perspective. So how do you perceive that there is a different tone in the way how the Iranians are talking about China vis-a-vis Iran from a political perspective? Thank you.
Okay, so these are great questions. I will try to do justice to each and every one of them. So I will start with the first one. I believe that we should consider the division. It is a convenient division to perceive the political atmosphere and arena in Iran. So we experts use it quite often, and it's the division between the conservatives or the ultra and the pragmatists. I'm not going to use moderates, but the reformers or the reformists, we can relate to that later on. I would say again, conservatives, forces in Iran, and the other camp is the pragmatists. Now, at the moment, Hassan Rouhani is ending his second term in office, and he was considered a pragmatist president. And even with a pragmatist government, it was very tough on his government and on Zarif to explain, and perhaps this is part of the problem, to explain to the Iranian public the necessity, the importance of relying on China or looking eastward. There is also a famous saying by Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic or the Islamic Revolution, who said, he said, we don't need neither east nor west. And there are people raising this saying in Iran today, recalling what Khomeini said like 40 years ago. And then pragmatist representatives of the government are trying to explain that at the time Khomeini said it 40 years ago, the East wasn't the East back then is not exactly the East today. And nowadays there should be no difference between East and West, and we should strive in order to recover and recuperate the Iranian economy, try to have business or cooperation and some sort of ties with both in order to have leverage or balance between the two forces. Again, the Iranian politicians, state representatives are not blind to what China is doing in other places around the world, and it is very much aware that China has interests and cooperation and ties with other states, including with Israel. So they are raising concerns. What can happen if in Hebrew we say, if we put all the eggs in one basket, what can happen if this basket is going to fall? All the eggs are going to break. So they are trying to find very creative solutions as to how to get back to improving the ties, lifting some of the sanctions, the international sanctions from the European front. And on the other hand, pursuing the connections with China, because China has proved, especially during the past 2 years, to be the Islamic Republic's lifeline. And they are very much aware of the fact that China has become part of what they call the axis of resistance against US policy, against American aggression, and etc. And they do point out and highlight the fact that China is not looking for a regime change in Iran. It's not looking to destabilize the region, but it is trying to invest in Iran and to push forward its economy, its infrastructure. So they are trying to show the good sides that can come out of these strengthening ties with China, and to convince the public that it is worthwhile and there should be no place for concerns. They also, of course, reject the claims that all sorts of islands are being sold or all sorts of things are being conducted. They are trying to push the rumors at the time and to ease the public opinion. So they, in one sense, they are not getting into too many details. And they are trying to keep the discourse on the level of very general declarations. So this is one point that I connect to your first question, and the second question is more complex, or as much as complex as the first answer. I can say that we can find different opinions, and I will relate specifically to IC because, as I said, one pragmatist president is leaving the office and another hardliner conservative is entering office. And many believe that his policy will be even more looking eastward in terms of a strategy when it comes to cooperation with China and also with Russia after he takes office. Now, the advancement of Iran-China relations and Iran-Russia relations has always been supported by the Supreme Leader Khamenei. So if this can be a sort of indication, we can say that this will probably continue. Further cooperation can be achieved through different forums. For example, through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Iran is, if I'm not mistaken, an observing party. And I also read just a few days ago that last month, the first Chinese representative was accepted for the first time to the OIC, to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And as he entered his new post, he expressed China's willingness to take this appointment as an opportunity to further deepen exchanges and cooperation with members of the OIC. So it is possible that there will be further cooperation on the basis of the Islamic denominator with these countries and in the region and with Russia as well. Now, the advantages of such forums, we can say, is not only in improving the relations between all the countries involved, and also being, I can say, a site for the expression of common interests, but it also gives them an ability to have another mechanism to manage tensions when and if they stem from divergent interests in the region. Now, I should note two things to what I just said. First, China and Russia's own relations are far from being free of tensions and divergent interests. That means that Russia and China also have their own political agenda and interest and their own tensions. Now, this is not the topic of our discussions, and it's not part of my expertise, so I'm not going to relate to that. I'm just saying that these tensions exist. But the second thing, and this is more to what I do find more interest in personally, is Iran's position. When it comes to Russia, the situation is somewhat different than the case of China. On the one hand, Russia and Iran may continue their strong and strategic alignment. Throughout recent decades, Russia had especially favorable relations with Iranian conservative factions, especially. So the status quo is likely to continue. But there is another view. And this other view points out that despite collaborations over Syria and defense supply, there are factors holding back the further progress of the relations between Russia and Iran. One of them is Russia's position regarding Iran's quest to obtain nuclear weapons. Tehran, on its part, has been suspicious of Russian ambitions in the region since the days of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. And this is unlikely to change even under Raisi. But a matter of fact, when intellectuals and social activists in Iran criticize the 25-year agreement with China, they compare it to some of the most demeaning agreements that Iran had to sign in the 19th century following military defeats when they confronted Russia. So I can say that in addition to all these, the relations between Iran and Russia are charged historically, and there is an historical suspicion between the two countries. And another factor that relates to Russia's diplomacy is Russia, at least what seems to be its diplomacy, is its attempts to find balance with all sides in the Middle Eastern region and cooperate with regional actors such as Saudi Arabia and Israel, instead of taking sides in local conflicts with one actor or another. So I hope I've managed to answer your questions.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, LIORA. That was very comprehensive. I think you make an important point that to a certain extent, Russia has some baggage with Iran that China may not have, at least at a superficial level. And so I think that's an important distinction. I want to give Dr. Yoel Kornreich an opportunity to ask a question. Please, Dr. Kornreich, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Brandon, and yes, thank you, LIORA, for the answers. I wonder, so in the past, or maybe in the present too, the US in some places and in some occasions try to export its own values or its own model of governance into other countries. And of course, the USSR did it in China and other countries. I'm wondering right now if China too is sort of trying to export its authoritarianism into Iran or other countries. We know that China is trying to maybe export this model of digital governance using perhaps censorship and all sorts of surveillance technologies. So I wonder what they're doing, and if they're doing in Iran the same kind of thing, whether exporting technology, maybe not just technology, or all sorts of techniques of governance, but also some ideas or approaches to illiberal ideas or approaches to governance, or using, of course, all sorts of experts who go to Iran and try to guide the government on how to govern. Yeah, and then, of course, if something like that happens, how it is received in Iran by the regime.
Okay, it's an interesting question, because the first thing I wanted to say that Iran has its own form of dictatorship. It doesn't need to export this form of governance to Iran. I believe that in that respect, there is a lot of emphasis in, let's say, the declarative level of state officials, that China has no intention to interfere with Iranian politics or with domestic affairs in Iran. China is coming to do business, is trying to help and invest in Iran due to its own interest, and they do not deal like very sensitive issues. Not only that, but one of the things that perhaps I did not mention yet is that at the beginning there was a denial by state officials in Iran about the many rumors and details of the agreement. There are a lot of talks about technological, but we don't know the details of what it means and what it entails. And for Iranians who have known very few periods of time throughout their history of freedom of expression and freedom of the press, these issues are very sensitive, and this is something that they do not disclose. They do not disclose even the scope of trade that is listed in China, or how much China intends to invest in Iran generally. So let alone they do not disclose the sort of information, the sensitive information regarding technology that you've just mentioned. And I can only say, by hearing a few things and participating in all sorts of other gatherings that I'm not going to mention where, that China is also, let's say, very sensitive in its, let's say, selling of or sharing several items in terms of technology to certain states. And that means Iran included. Having said that, everything is open. There are people who say that everything is for sale if you get the right price, or if you're willing to pay for it. And we can say that in terms of suppression, then Iran and China are usually take up the very top positions in all the international graphs. So in that respect, they are sort of competitors, but I know that it's a dubious place to be. Who is the most suppressing towards its citizens? But we do know that in Iran, although they are censoring the internet and the use of social media, they weren't as efficient and systematic as the Chinese were. So in that respect, I'm not sure what they are exactly doing. I can only assume that they are talking about these things as well. So they are on the table. But other than that, in terms of being more specific, I'm not sure. So I don't want just to say things that I cannot substantiate in any way or form. I would also say that at the beginning, state officials, again, rejected or denied the rumors about the selling of national interests or national assets to China. And later on, the state responded differently. We know of a petition that was signed by we will call them celebs, Iranian celebs, against the agreement with China, saying that it's an illegitimate agreement because it was not brought to, the details were not brought to the attention of the Iranian public. And I would also mention that because it was signed as an international, as an agreement memorandum, the government is not obliged to bring it to the Majlis, to the parliament, for the parliament to view the agreement and the details and to vote on it. So this only, again, adds to the level of public suspicion in this agreement. And of course, it doesn't do any good to the image of China in Iran, whether it is among the political elite from the reformist camp or the general public that has a vested interest in the future of the country. Now, I will go back to the petition by the Iranian celebs that was, it was also signed online and it was sent to government officials. And at least one director in Iran, he's very, very acclaimed director in Iran. I don't want to mention his name, but he reported that he was threatened by government officials or government representatives to withdraw his signatures from his opposition to the agreement, and he knows of others who were threatened with an arrest as well. Not only that, but people who oppose the agreement and the development of ties with China are being slammed and attacked through state-sponsored media. They are being called agents of the Western powers and the counter-revolutionary forces. And this actually paves the way even to bring them into justice or to indict them in court for all sorts of accusations for disrupting public health and for disrupting the state policies and go against. So it actually brings this entire debate over on China relations into the moral level or moral sphere that we know that are taking place in Iran when there is a strong opposition towards certain policy. And I can say that for right now, we can say that China's image is a bit fractured, although they are trying to correct it in all sorts of ways via soft power channels. Like I read that China was offering to give to Iran some of its dramas or series, television series, to be screened in Iran for the Iranian public to get more familiar with Chinese culture. There are also Confucius institutes operating in Iran. There are also a lot of websites, mostly for tourists, but tourism has suffered a lot during the past year and a half due to the coronavirus. But they are trying to introduce again to show, for example, there is a very cute website trying to show that not all Chinese food is odd or strange, and Chinese also eat vegetables and fruits and all sorts of things that Iranians can also relate to. So not everything is strange to the Iranian taste, as people might think. So there is a lot of channels in terms of culture that are trying to bring the people together, but at the time, because of the Islamic Republic's means to bring in these cooperation, then it sheds bad light in terms of the public's acceptance in Iran.
Thank you, LIORA. I want to give Professor Ori Sela the opportunity now to ask a question. Please, Ori.
Thanks, Enrico. Thanks, Brandon. And thank you, LIORA. It's a fascinating discussion. I think that it also brings us back to the group that you refer to very generally as the national interest group. And I'm wondering a few things regarding that national group and national interest group. First, do the national interest group vis-a-vis China, is it converging with the, I don't know if you call them the same way, the national group, the national interest group vis-a-vis Russia? Are these are these converging groups? And also, whether this group has any political agency, any political power, or is that mainly something that is, let's say, in the public sphere to the extent that it exists in Iran? These are the main kind of two preliminary questions.
Ori, just to make sure I understand,
Okay.
just to make sure I understand. Sorry, LIORA, I don't mean to cut you off. In terms of referring to parties who are speaking in the name of Iranian national interest, is that what you're referring to?
First, do the group that LIORA was referring to as national interest group vis-a-vis China, meaning those who, let's say, doubt China's involvement in Iran, is that group similar or converging with those who feel the same way about Russia or similarly about Russia?
Okay, thank you. Or LIORA.
Okay, so I would say yes and no. Yes, because again, they view the world in terms of their position against the US. And right now, the US and US sanctions are the biggest burden. And it is also charged with a long history that Iran has with the US. And of course, it's not only in terms of politics or in terms of economy or even culture. These are like the vision or the founding forms, founding columns of the Islamic Republic. This is part of the ideology, and it is embedded with religion, and it is very hard to step from this high pedestal of the animosity towards the US. So if you look at it on a general level, anyone who can serve Iran in its fight or resistance, as they would call it, their resistance against American policy or American sanctions, or what they call as American terrorism, economic terrorism, they view it in these terms, then they are for it. even if it's temporary or even if it's going to last long, this is something that they can consider. This is perhaps a price that they are willing to pay. It also supports their survival because the situation, the economic situation of Iran for the past few years is deteriorating. The inflation is rising. The unemployment rate is above two-digit number for the past decade. And many of the Iranian population is a young population, is their ages is below 35, and these are the people who are in the particular stage of their life are looking for a better future. And if the Islamic Republic cannot promise them even the horizon or better horizon, if not a better present, then some kind of a hope for a better future, then the survival and the future of the Islamic Republic is in jeopardy. So if this means to play along with, I don't know, I don't want to say a bad word, but to play along with who can perhaps, I don't know, jeopardize you in the long run, then maybe they are willing to take the risk. But I do believe that they are also playing very cautiously. They are also trying, and I am on the camp that believe that even if the president-elect of Iran, Raisi, is a hardliner, again, he will not pull away the rug under the opportunity to either revive the JCPOA or reach a new agreement in order to lift the sanctions of Iran. And there are those who say that even if the US sanctions are to be lifted, this will mean more business for China with Iran. So there are all sorts of voices in the air, and it is very hard to determine, and I go back to what you try to ask, Ori. I don't know if at the moment, because there is so much background noise about the agreement and about the elections of Raisi and what is going on in Iran, and we have a new president at the White House, and of course there are changes in Iran, and there is a COVID. So there are a lot of elements that are still unknown for me to be able to say there is a clear division between camps, and there is one camp that thinks that they should pursue in one way and not and leave the other way behind. I believe that it's a complex situation, and I do believe that the Iranians are taking into consideration all these elements, and they try to measure them up with what they can live with in order to survive and to have a future for the Islamic Republic.
That's certainly a great point, LIORA, and there certainly are a lot of moving parts, right? The situation is quite dynamic, and I think you've done an excellent job of sort of mapping the terrain for us, and certainly pointing out some areas that we need to continue to watch as things unfold in the coming months and years. So on behalf of my partners, I think the time has come for me to say thank you to you for being with us today, for sharing your time and expertise. We appreciate it. And we hope to have you back again with us in the near future. And thank you very much.